Welcome to the Lifelong Rivals Sports Podcast. I'm Zach Kaufman here with Ryan D'Amico.
What's up, man? What's up? Yeah, I'm excited. I'm really excited. Look, I'm excited every time we do a show, but I'm really excited for this one because this is something that I've wanted to talk about on a platform for some time, and I'm excited to get it out there. And I'm excited to just get people's opinion on it, get their view on the topic we're gonna discuss here tonight, and just have a good conversation here with you. I'm interested to see. We've discussed this a little bit, but I'm interested to get really in depth with you about your kind of your input on this and where you stand with everything. So I'm really excited to talk about this here.
Yeah, we're trying something new today, so we'll be interested in your feedback, what you're thinking here moving forward. Now, I was recommended a book called Tools of Titans. It's one of my favorite books. It's the biggest book I've ever read. It's one of my favorite books. It's been fascinating to me. What it is Tim Ferriss is a podcaster. He interviews a whole bunch of people, successful people from many different industries. And one person in there specifically really stood out to me with their advice. Of his advice is to follow what angers you. And that's one of the things we'll be talking about today. But for him, that's kind of what put him on, what got him noticed. That the first thing he ever did to really stand out, he's currently a filmmaker, he's a YouTuber, he's a vlogger. He's extremely popular on YouTube. But the first thing that really got him noticed was he got a fine, a $50 fine for not riding his bike in the bike lane in New York. So that kind of inspired him to make his own video. He videoed himself with the police officer giving him the fine, and then he ended up videoing himself riding in the bike lane. So he decided to do exactly as the police officer demanded, and he accepted whatever was there. And it's a very entertaining video there where he just rode his bike through the bike lane, running into anything in his way. So there's many construction sites. He's running into cones, various things like that, trash cans. There's a taxi at one point that parks there in the bike lane that he crashes into. There's a truck unloading something that he crashes into and then falls into the back of the truck. And then there's the finale is him actually, there's a police car that parks there in the bike lane that he crashes into. So that now has almost 20 million views. That kind of put him on the map. And he did that from obviously what angered him and getting that $50 ticket there. And I feel like that's what we've been doing. Both of us have had this conversation that we've been frustrated with a lot of the sports media, a lot of what's on ESPN, and we wanted to create something on our own. We were excited about that. We both really enjoy each other's viewpoints, even though our teams are complete rivals there, which is why we named the podcast the Lifelong Rivals Sports Podcast, and we felt like that was a really good fit. So that's what we're going to be talking about today. Some of our frustrations as we deal with the world and learning about following sports and engaging in the sports world.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, that's exactly what this podcast is going to be about tonight. Is going to be about our frustration and our anger, like Zach talked about there in the little intro, with sports mainstream media. Now, mainstream media in particular, your ESPNs, your NFL network, MLB network, any sort of mainstream media that you're seeing on television, or on radio for that matter. I grew up listening to a lot of sports talk radio, and even that has become extremely, extremely poor and extremely watered down as I've gotten older. So that's what this is going to be about. That's what we're going to get into here, and that's what we're going to discuss. And things will probably get a little intense, and this is something we, especially myself, I care a lot about and have been frustrated with probably over the last decade or so since I got out of high school. So we'll get things started here, Zach. I'm going to basically get this rolling with basically a story that I've told a lot of people. I've told you, and it was growing up with my dad. Obviously, he would always drive, of course. I couldn't drive at that age. And being in the truck with him, he would always have on sports radio. He'd always have on 610 WIP Philly Sports Talk Radio, which as a kid, I mean, that's fantastic. I love sports. I mean, they're constantly talking about sports at that time. They're constantly talking about sports. No filler, no bullshit, no nothing. It's straight sports talk. And I felt like that really helped me learn a lot about sports. Just get my knowledge up, just learn a different variety of sports, not just the NFL, which it seems like every mainstream sports media just wants to bury the NFL down our throat. Rightfully so. It's the number one sport in our country. But at the same time, there are a lot of other great sports in this country that can be discussed. But at that point, like I said, I felt like growing up, I actually learned something from those guys. And I actually learned something from listening to sports talk radio. I have two cousins right now that are 10 and 13. And I feel bad for them that they have to listen to the garbage that sports talk radio is today and the garbage that ESPN is today. Because I feel like those kids aren't learning anything from what is on mainstream sports media. And that's my biggest thing, is people aren't learning anything. These people that are on mainstream sports media, they're not teaching us anything. Like, they're not putting anything informative into our minds. That's my biggest takeaway. I don't know what your biggest takeaway with the lack of sports media is, Zach, but that's my biggest, is that I am just not learning anything. And I don't think the younger generation that wants to get into sports and is just starting to learn about sports and get into it in depth is not learning anything from listening to these mainstream sports medias.
I would agree with that for the most part, that it doesn't offer the learning aspect. There's a lot of just the arguing back and forth, and not just that. I understand that can be effective sometimes, and you can learn from that sometimes, but it's almost like they're arguing for the sake of arguing. Like every single thing Skip Bayless has ever done.
Oh yeah.
He's constantly arguing and trying to be more and more outrageous and just kind of get those clips that other people can use to promote ESPN or whatever it is, that like, oh, he said this crazy thing, I can't believe that. And it's just, there's way too much of that. And I feel like some of it is credited to ESPN. Just has too much coverage to really fill with actual relevant things that people care about and people are going to be interested in learning about. So that ends up being a lot of the filler of people arguing, people trying to put their perspective into different things, kind of like the celebrity drama that comes in, and oh, this person's mom said this about this other player, like how does that affect the locker? Like they just talk about things that aren't really relevant, but they're out of stuff to talk about because they're running 24/7 on all this different content. And I feel like that's a major frustration of it, that it just they lose kind of those important details of the sport, of learning about the sport, learning about the players, in a lot of that just kind of filler where they're arguing back and forth about things that aren't really relevant.
Yeah, and I think, you touched on Skip Bayless. I have a paper in front of me that has a handful of various things written down on it in regards to what we're talking about tonight. Skip Bayless is one of those things I wrote down because Skip Bayless is look, and I think it's pretty clear that at this point it's just an act. It's what ESPN tells him to do. It's what he gets paid money to do, is act like a buffoon and support the Cowboys and continue to say that they're the best team in football. I mean, it's tired at this point. And he's just that. And the show, I don't know if you've ever watched it. It's on ESPN Radio as well, but it's also on ESPN, on ESPN2, I believe. It's called Highly Questionable. It's with Dan Le Batard and his dad, or his poppy, which is, to me, I think that's the worst show, if you can call it a show, on ESPN. I mean, that is just nothing more than shock jock bullshit. Like, at no point on that show, I feel like, do they talk about sports? Like, it's just like random crazy junk. It's like, if I want to watch that, like, I'll turn on Comedy Central. Like, I'll turn on, a channel like that. I'll turn on Howard Stern. Like, I don't need to turn on ESPN, which is supposed to be the quote unquote worldwide leader in sports, not the worldwide leader in comedy and politics and race. Okay? This is sports. I turn on that channel, or what I used to. It's to put aside the politics, the race, the bullshit that we have going on in our country day after day after day, and the tragedies that seem to have happen in our country on a weekly basis at this point. I'd turn on that to get away from this. And that's the kind of stuff that is on there now. Like, it's brutal. Like, it's so bad. And real quickly, Zach, I'll let you touch on that. Another thing that really irks me, remember when we were younger, Zach, like elementary school, middle school, then up to high school, when you would turn on the 11 o'clock Sports Center, what did you see on there? Highlights. You saw a lot of highlights because guess what? You were at school that day. Maybe you went to the football game that Friday night. You hung out with your friends afterwards, and then you go home. You didn't get to see anything that happened in sports. In that day and age, there was no Twitter. There was no sports apps. There was none of that stuff. Yeah. So you relied on that kind of stuff for highlights. They don't show highlights anymore. And when they do show highlights, it's a 10-second clip, and then they throw the score up. Like, I saw someone's tweet. It's actually someone you know. His name's Matt Reha. He went to high school with me, and we played baseball with him when we were younger. And he tweeted that a while ago, saying that I remember he said that irks him, that they don't show highlights anymore. And that's another thing that bothers me with ESPN is the lack of highlights that they refuse to show and that they don't show, and they show it and then they have two guys talking about it for 5 minutes, and it's just like you said, and it's usually just them going back and forth arguing about some crap.
I'm the exact same way, and where I see it is a little bit different because I'm beyond watching ESPN. I've been off it since when I was in college. The only time I see it on is at the gym. They always have one or two TVs that's playing ESPN or ESPN2 at all times. But like you were saying, the thing that's missing is the highlights. It's just like every time I look up, they're discussing someone's tweet or they're showing a different thing that someone posted somewhere, or they're having two people sitting at a table arguing. It's never highlights. Legitimately, I'm there 5 days a week, and I can't tell you the last time I saw actual highlights going on there. Every now and then, I'll catch like a Sports Center top 10 where I'm there at the exact right moment for that to happen. But most of the time, it's legitimately people sitting at a desk or a tweet being displayed. And you can't tell it apart from the news one side by side, the news TV playing CNN. And they're like, here's Donald Trump's tweet. Here's LeBron's tweet on ESPN. That's not what I want to see when it comes to sports.
Exactly. And I think that goes hand in hand with the fact that ESPN ratings have dropped and have been declining, and I think will continue to decline. The 6 o'clock Sports Center, which was another popular Sports Center, you always had your 6 o'clock p.m. Sports Center and your 11 o'clock Sports Center, which were the two big sports centers for that day in sports. The 6 o'clock Sports Center now is called The Six, in quotes, and is hosted by Michael A. Smith and Jamil Hill. That outside of highly questionable, I may have watched 10 minutes of that show once, and I refuse to watch it. It is terrible, Zach. I mean, it is awful TV. I mean, the hosts are getting suspended for making comments about Donald Trump. Like, I mean, you're not on there to talk about our president. Like, you're not. You were on there to talk about sports. So talk about sports. And then you get mad when your boss suspends you for talking ill will about our president. Granted, you might not agree with what he's doing. You might not agree with the person he is. But at the end of the day, he's our president, and you shouldn't talk about him. I'm not the biggest fan of the guy, but I'm not going to go out of my way to say something about him when I'm getting paid to talk about sports. That's just – I wouldn't do that. So that's just another show, another example, and another problem I think ESPN has is and part of the reason why they're losing ratings. And they're taking off good shows like NFL Primetime. I don't know if you remember NFL Primetime when we were kids, Zach, on Sunday nights with Chris Berman and Tom Jackson, and they would break down each game and they would show
highlights.
They would show highlights of every single game that day and discuss it. And it was fantastic. I remember I'd watch it every Sunday. I would watch it with my dad. It was a staple in my life. And then one year, they just said, oh, we're getting rid of it. Even though millions of people watch it and love it, we're just going to get rid of it. We have no exact reason why. It's not that it's doing poorly. We're just going to take it off the air. And NFL Sunday Countdown, another show that used to be good, is awful now. Like, that's unwatchable now. I mean, like the buffoons that they have on there, like Sam Ponder's the host now. I mean, Randy Moss, Charles Woodson, Matt Hasselbeck, like Rex Ryan, for God's sakes, like you have Rex Ryan on there. It's just, Zach, I just don't get it, man. I don't understand it. And there's a lot of people out there that do not like the direction that ESPN is going.
And one thing we've talked about before, when it comes to coverage of professional sports, I do appreciate the opinion of people that have played before, but it's tough when it's just stacked with all former players that you don't have that perspective of people like us that didn't make it to the professional level. Not that there's anything wrong either way, but they don't have that fans perspective within the people there. And you're getting certain insights, which is a positive to the lifestyle, the being a player, what that's like, but you're missing some of that of kind of the person watching and enjoying that.
Absolutely. I mean, absolutely. I think you make a great point, Zach. I think you hit the nail right on the head. While, look, I'm not telling ESPN to not have any former athletes on the show to add insight, because I think it adds great insight. I think it adds great insight into the minds of athletes. And when we're watching, these games and they're giving their opinions, obviously they're going to see things differently than people that haven't played the sport. But at the same time, I mean, you're not giving the great people that helped build ESPN that never played sports, like Chris Berman, like Bob Lee, like John Saunders, like Stuart Scott. I mean, the list goes on and on of these people that helped build ESPN, but guess what? They never played. And they're the reason ESPN is where they're at today. So I think it's definitely watered down with former players just kind of taking the position of quote unquote analysts that is just not there anymore.
See, my problem with the former players isn't them being former players. It's not them seeing from my perspective, but I just can't stand when they're on just giving their opinion. I want to hear your unique perspective, if you're on there, about what I was saying before, about their lifestyle, what it's like being a player, how you're coached. Things like that are interesting to me, but I don't want to just hear that you think this about this team and that, boom, that's it. That doesn't interest me.
No, absolutely. Or like, just we'll use I don't know. We'll use Ryan Clark as an example. I'm not picking on Ryan Clark. He's just the first name that came to mind when I was thinking about NFL. He's been on ESPN for a couple of years now, former Steelers defensive back. So they'll say, hey, Ryan, who do you like to win this game and why? Zach, I like the Eagles to win this game. I think they win this game if they don't turn the ball over. No shit. Hey, thanks. My 10-year-old cousin could have given you that breakdown. Why don't you give us some X's and O's perspective? Like, oh, well, like they're the better rushing team. They're fifth in the league in rushing, and the team they're playing is 28th in the league in rushing. So if they commit to the running game, they should have success, shorten the game, win time of possession, and obviously, if they don't turn the ball over, that's going to help, of course. But, I mean, why don't you give us some in-depth breakdowns instead of just the same old dry, generic bullshit like, oh, they're going to win the game if they score more points than the other team. Like, we know that, okay? We don't need you to tell us that.
It's very true. And from there, I'm going to move on to my actual biggest problem when it comes to ESPN and a lot of the mainstream media.
Let's hear it.
That got me to completely quit ESPN. I was watching it in college every single day.
So would you agree?
This stood out to me.
would you agree that you don't? Because I'm the same way. I don't watch it at all either. The only way I watch ESPN is if it's a sporting event. Agreed?
Correct. Yes.
Yes. You don't watch any shows. You don't watch anything, right? Yep.
Nothing at all. There's a couple of 30 for 30s that have been recommended for me.
Right.
Those for sure. But
that's about the only thing they're doing well. And I'm sure it'll be a matter of time before they take those off the air because they're doing too well. Because that's what they do. When things go well, they take them off the air. But sorry, go ahead, Zach.
But the number one thing that just I could not stand anymore is just their huge obsession with name brand players. I was just so tired of
exactly what you mean.
The TV on every single day, and there's 17 topics about LeBron, 15 about Tiger Woods, and then 25 about Kobe and some kind of highlight receiver, whoever's hot that week or that year, whatever it is. They just they stick with these same players and just analyze everything about them. And I remember the specific 2-night period when I just had enough. And I was very excited. I was given off class. I forget if it was a snow day or what the deal was, but I didn't have a class in the evening. It was during the NBA. I was like, man, I have not watched LeBron play at all this year. They were playing against the Clippers, who were terrible. But I was like, I just want to watch LeBron play tonight. I just want to chill. I don't want to do any schoolwork. I'm watching LeBron. So I sat there and I watched the entire game. And he looked amazing. The Cavs, he was still in the Cavs. This was before he went to the Heat. But the Cavs looked great. They dominated the first 3 quarters against this terrible Clippers team. And then it hit the fourth quarter, and LeBron and some of his teammates at that point, I don't even remember. It was one of the not as good Cavs teams. So I'm sure Mo Williams was there, but I don't really remember beyond that. But they just started jacking up threes every possession and missing them. And they let the Clippers come back and come back and come back. And I think it was like a 2 or 3 point game. And then the Cavs finally pulled it out and they won by 5 or 7. And that was fine. I enjoyed the insights. But the next day I turned on ESPN and they showed highlights of the game. And I'm telling you, LeBron, I think in the fourth quarter, he was 1 for 7 on 3-pointers. And they show highlights, and they're like, here's LeBron hitting a 3. Here's LeBron hitting a 3. Here's LeBron hitting a 3 in the fourth quarter. Let's talk about how great LeBron was. And it was legitimately him taking bad shots and missing a whole bunch of threes. That was the reason the Clippers were even in it. And they wanted to talk about how clutch he is, how he's been shooting, whatever it was. And then the next night, the same thing happened. I had off. I watched the Cavs play. They got a big lead. They blew the lead because they just started chucking up threes. Same thing the next day on ESPN. They want to talk about LeBron being clutch. Here's LeBron hitting a 3-pointer, even though he was 3 for 12 shooting from 3-point range. Whatever it was, he was just so overhyped. And I was at a point that I was just done. I was like, I can't believe this. I'm finding a different source. And that's what I went to from that point on. And I remember where I was living. I remember where my roommates were sitting on the couch as I made that decision. And I was like, I'm not going to do that with these guys anymore. I'm done.
Right. Look, I don't blame you. I don't remember my exact time where I had the same kind of epiphany, I guess you could call it, and say, look, I can't watch this anymore. But definitely, I understand where you're coming from with your, I forget how you labeled it. I guess they're
brand name players.
They're just pounding brand name players down your throat. I mean, I wrote down a few here. I mean, I remember Tiger Woods. They're still doing it with Tiger Woods. I mean, they are praying Tiger Woods comes back. I mean, literally pray. It's become anytime Tiger Woods picks up a golf club, they put that breaking news thing on the bottom of the screen and say, "Oh, Tiger Woods swung a golf club for the first time in 6 months." I don't give a shit. 1, because he's old and washed up. 2, he's never going to be the same player that he was. 3, he's never going to break Jack Nicklaus's record. And 4, guess what? There's a guy by the name of Jordan Spieth that's one of the best young golfers in the world that I'm not saying he's going to be Tiger Woods one day, but he's damn good. And there's a few other really good golfers that, maybe instead of focus on Tiger Woods so much, you focus on these young guys and give them some attention. And then I remember the Tebow drama that we went through for so long there. God, they just
I can't believe I forgot Tebow.
They could just not get enough of Tim Tebow. I mean, good night. Anytime he got on, I mean, I remember when he went to the Eagles. I remember that like it was like the first thing I thought of was, holy Christ, there's going to be 80 million cameras at their practices now, and like it was just brutal. And with Kaepernick, that Kaepernick story, which I mean, obviously turned into much bigger than football, but I mean, they could just not let that go for the life of them. Like literally, it was just months later, and it was like that they just couldn't stop. And then, like, the Patriots with the Deflategate, they love talking about the Patriots. It's just, like, when they get focused on a topic, man, they just try to ram it down your throat and not talk about anything else. And that is a problem. That is a big, big problem. You need to have variety. You need it. Because not everyone in our country, millions upon millions of people in our country, not everyone just likes the NFL. Or not everyone just likes baseball. I mean, you need to have some sort of variety, and that's just – it's not what they do. And it's not – I mean, they used to. What changed? I don't know. I don't know what changed. I don't know whether it's, the upper, management, whether it's writers, producers. I don't know. But it's not changing for the better because that station is really hurting, and ratings are proving it. Ratings are going down. I mean, there's been talks. I just read a report yesterday that there's talks that they might be forced to get rid of Monday Night Football because of money purposes. So, I mean, yeah, it's not going good over at ESPN. So, and I think. I hope it continues, to be honest with you. I hope ESPN fades away. And I hope this as we get into like 2020 and 2000 and so on and so forth, I hope we get into more of these. I hope podcasts is the way of the future and vlogs is the way of the future. I mean, you're seeing a site in Barstool Sports who's really taken off. I'm partial to Barstool, or I should say I'm on the fence with Barstool, I should say. Some things I like, some things I don't like. But they're obviously doing really good things over there. I mean, they have a huge, huge following. It's kind of turning like a cult following. But look, they're doing really good things. And this is kind of where I hope sports media goes to. I hope it goes to this kind of direction and it kind of gets away from ESPN. I would not be disappointed if it got away from ESPN. If someone could think or another station came up and just basically did the opposite of what ESPN's doing now, I think they would have something there.
And I'm glad you brought that up because that's actually where I was going next on what saved me from ESPN. And there's one thing that stood out above all else. I told you how when I left ESPN, it was because of basketball, and I needed to find another source that was going to actually give me the highlights, go over what happened. And with the specific podcast I found, they're actually really funny too, which adds a bonus. So at that point, they were still very young, but it was called The Basketball Jones. And since then, they've transitioned to being the starters. They're actually on NBA TV, but their podcast is great. It's very entertaining. They know what they're talking about when it comes to the NBA. None of them have played in the NBA, but they have great insights. I highly recommend. They do a daily show, which kind of that's tough to do. Respect to anyone who does a daily show, and it's tough to have enough content. But the thing I highly recommend from them, they do what's called the drop every Friday, which is their big long episode where they go over what's been happening, some important topics in the NBA. And then a lot of times they'll mix in some kind of like, whether it's funny questions or like goofy games or different things. It's perfect for when I'm going on some kind of long drive on the weekend or anything like that to be entertaining. I learn things. I laugh at a lot of their jokes. That's one that really kind of changed my life and got me into listening to podcasts. So that stood out more than anything over the last probably about 7 years since I got away from ESPN. My other recommendations are I listen to the Dynasty Nerds fantasy football podcast. That's a great one for people in a deeper fantasy league. They talk about dynasty football and they go real in depth there. I get most of my breaking news and information from rotoworld.com. I love that website because it has the information, and attached to that with every single one, it has whether it's a fantasy slant to it, whether there's some kind of other additional comments. They always add things, even if it's something irrelevant, like if a player who's been retired for 3 years gets arrested or something like that, or gets charged with drunk driving, they'll still put it in there, and then they'll be like, he's been out of the NFL since 2014, so this shouldn't affect your fantasy rosters. So I really like that aspect from them. And I'm very fascinated to see, because the next one I've loved for the last probably 4 or 5 years, but it just got bought by ESPN. So I'm not sure what's going to happen. But draftexpress.com is the best thing I've ever found for NBA draft information, news, projections. They've been incredibly accurate year after year after year. I'm in a basketball fantasy dynasty league there that I always consistently look into what that website has. It has great video breakdowns of all the top players that even could be drafted. Even when weird things happen, like Bruno Caballo gets drafted a couple years ago and nobody knew who that was. Amazingly, they had like a strengths and weaknesses video for him, and they've been so in depth. So I don't know what to expect with that being purchased by ESPN. I know it's not going to be in the same format, but hopefully that's something I can still have access to.
Yeah, no, for sure. I mean, those are great recommendations there, Zach. I'm going to actually check a few of those out that I haven't had the chance. I haven't heard about a few of those that you touched on there. My big one, and it's very generic and it's very plain, but it's very easy and it's very simple. YouTube is a big platform for me. One, highlights. I mean, I've said the 100%. Word highlight. I've probably said the word highlights about 20. I think that was 27 times, if I counted correctly, that I've said the word highlights. Now it's 28. But that's what I do. I mean, NFL has their own page. NHL. I mean, I'm a big hockey guy, and I know hockey is not the sport it was even in the 90s and what it is now. ESPN doesn't even cover hockey hardly anymore. But I love hockey, NBA, MLB. They each have obviously their own page, and in turn, they each they show highlights, and it's not the 10-second clip that ESPN shows. I mean, they're minute-long highlights that with the key plays from the game, and I mean the audio from the broadcast and everything. It's fantastic. I love it. That's where I get my highlights from, is YouTube. And I also do, I don't know if there's a term for it, but I call it YouTube roaming, which is like, I'll click on one video, right? And then they have the suggested videos below it. And I'd be like, oh, that catches my attention. Boom. And then the next video. And then the next video after that is something that catches my attention after that. And it's kind of like the whole like going down a rabbit hole kind of thing. Before you know it, you're finding like different things that you know, or different, pages, and you're subscribing to different pages because you're like, man, this is really interesting. This is fantastic. These guys know what they're talking about. And it's just, before you know it, you've subscribed to like 4 channels that night because you've just found these different pages that are extremely informative and are doing things the way that you would do them, or that we do them. And that to me is my big one, is YouTube. I think what YouTube is and what it does and what it allows is obviously fantastic. So that's my big one. I don't have a whole lot of other ones, to be honest with you. I'm not really in depth on that kind of stuff, just as far as timing goes. When I do have time to do things, usually I'm just dedicating it to YouTube. But you touched on the 30 for 30s, and then you talked about, I know it was NBA draft, but I was going to talk about NFL draft. Those are 2 things that ESPN are doing well, and I hope they continue to do that, because I really like the 30 for 30. I think that's the best thing that they have going for them right now is the 30 for 30. And then the NFL draft, they've kept the same for so long, and I hope they keep it this way, because I think they do a very good job of covering the NFL draft as well, with the minds and the experts that they have on there. And it's not just a bunch of former players up there talking. It's actually guys that know what they're talking about as far as college and the draft go, and their relation to college, to the NFL. So those are two things. I don't want to completely just bury ESPN. Those are two good things that jump out to me that I really like. I love the 30 for 30, and I love their NFL draft coverage.
Yeah, now that you bring it up, those things definitely do stand out. And that's something I didn't think about before. But yeah, every single year I do check into the NFL draft. I do check into the NBA draft. They're difficult to stay around for the whole thing.
Oh, geez, yeah.
while I'm tuned in, or even it's perfect for if I'm cooking or doing something else and it's kind of in the background.
That's great. Yep.
They do a very, very good job on all of those things. And the 30 for 30s, there's a lot of very, very impressive ones when it comes to 30 for 30s.
Yeah, they're fantastic. That's one of the better things ESPN ever put out, and one of the better ideas that ESPN has ever done, because it seems like everyone they put out is extremely informative. It's extremely well put together, and even something that you may have thought you knew a lot about, you watch those and you just realize you didn't know nothing, and it teaches you so much more. That's one of the reasons why I like that, because I learn things. I learn things from 30 for 30. Every single thing, even the Fab Five one. I love Michigan sports. I love Michigan basketball. I learned so much, like behind the scenes stuff from that 30 for 30, from Jalen Rose and Chris Webb. I mean, from Steve Fisher. I mean, so much stuff from that episode that I had no idea about, that I thought I knew a lot about the Fab Five. Didn't know jack shit compared to what that episode taught me. So 30 for 30 is definitely one of the better things there.
And I've been impressed when it comes to even topics I wouldn't normally be interested or choose for myself. I specifically remember, again, a time in college, I was going to leave for class, and my roommate turned on the Steve Bartman 30 for 30.
That's a great one.
I don't even care about baseball, but I sat down. I was like, oh, I'm going to leave in like 10 minutes or whatever it was. And I sat down and started watching it, and I couldn't leave. It was incredible. And like I said, not even a baseball fan, but it was amazing, the whole storyline between going through Steve Bartman's life, like what he was thinking at that time when he reached over to grab that ball. So Moises Alou, I think it was the fielder that couldn't catch it. And just that conflict of he wanted the ball, but he clearly knew that he had been a detriment to his favorite team in the world. So a whole lot of fantastic different aspects that they covered throughout that, and well worth whatever class it was I skipped in college.
Well worth it. I think a lot of people would feel that way, that, and I'm sure a lot of people out there have skipped the class because they got either they were watching something like that, or they were watching their favorite sporting event or something like that. That class, you can make that up and you can get that stuff back. But that Bartman one's fantastic, man, and all those 30 for 30s are obviously very good. So look, man, we touched on a lot of stuff here. We really did. We touched on a lot of what ESPN and what mainstream sports media and radio and look, I didn't even touch on ESPN. I can't believe it. I didn't even touch on ESPN radio. I think ESPN radio is absolute dog shit. Look, I remember when ESPN radio was around and Scott Van Pelt was on it. When Mike and Mike, I thought was a lot better than what it was now, ever since they've had their kind of quarrel, I guess you could say. But I mean, what's on there now between Highly Questionable, which is a radio show, like I mentioned, with Dan Le Batard, which I can't listen to 5 seconds of that. The Right Time with Bomani Jones, who Bomani Jones is nothing more than a chest-pounding, proud, typical African-American who is racist, who, I mean, I'll be the first to say it. I have no problem saying it. He's a racist. I mean, that's just what he is. And if you listen to him for any amount of time, you'll get that view from him. So I can't listen to him either because it's just I can't. I mean, there's a couple shows now and then. I think Mel Kiper and Dari Noka, they do a show on Saturday mornings that I think is pretty decent when they talk about college football and whatnot. I think that's a pretty good show. But as a whole, I think ESPN Radio, again, is another platform that is really, really watered down and is just and it's funny because there's not many people I know that like Highly Questionable. There's not many people I know that like Mike and Mike in the Morning. There's not many people that I know that like The Right Time of Monty Jones. There's just not. And yet they just continue to stay around and stay afloat.
Yeah, ESPN Radio is something I've never really got into. I know I tried it out at one point, I want to say in high school, but it never was something I felt was valuable to me. And it wasn't, I'd much rather have a podcast where I can more so choose the topic, choose the people I'm listening to, and choose the time I'm listening to it. That works a lot better for me. So that's why I have no insights on that. I've never really got into ESPN Radio at all.
Well, consider yourself lucky. You're one of the lucky ones, Zach, because you haven't wasted any of your life listening to them because it's just not any good. And, I think it gets back to a big problem that it just kind of our country has is, perfect example. So when you apply for a job and it says minimum of 2 years requirement, well, how am I going to get those 2 years of experience when you're not allowing me to do so, when jobs aren't allowing me to get those years of experience? I feel like that's kind of the way it is in sports is they're not allowing these people coming out of college to come on the air, to come on ESPN television, ESPN radio, anything like that. It's all these people that have been on there for so long, and it's just become tired and it's become watered down, and they're just not giving this newer generation a shot. Where, look, and I know this newer generation gets, beaten down for, the quote unquote millennials, but I don't think the people that are coming out of college that are like we came out of college or which was 6 years ago, to the people that are coming out of college, recently, I don't think they're as bad as some of the kids in high school now, but they're just not giving these people shots. I mean, the people that are going to school for journalism and broadcast and media studies, that kind of stuff, I mean, they're not getting a shot. So I think it's a shame, and I think that they would be better suited if they got some new blood in there and kind of switch things up. And I think that would go a long way in kind of trying to fix the problem that they have there.
That's fascinating to me. That's something I never even thought about, of how little young energy they've ever had. There hasn't been someone real young that's
a long time.
Because it's mostly former players, like we've talked about, probably 40s, 50s, former coaches, things like that are even older than that. And they're missing that young generation.
Like how many hosts are middle-aged males or females on that show? Or on that station. You look at any sort of show, it's all middle-aged people for the most part. I mean, you look at someone like Michelle Beadle, people think she's young. She's in her 40s. Now I'm not saying that's old, but I mean that's all but middle age. I mean, and then outside of some of the younger girls that they have on there that are on there strictly because they're attractive, which I'm not afraid to say that. I mean, they are. I mean, ESPN doesn't hire ugly girls. I don't want that to sound shallow of me, but that's just the facts. But outside of those people, they're all middle-aged men. And there's no young energy on there to try to liven things up. And look, I don't get it. I don't understand it, but I don't make those decisions, and I'll never make those decisions. So I don't have to worry about it, I guess, but I do anyway.
All right, well, we'll wrap it up here unless there's anything else you have to add. I know we went through a lot of our frustrations there with the mainstream media, especially ESPN. We went through some different recommendations on some alternatives on what you can do to replace that. I did really like your recommendation of YouTube. That is something I use all the time, but didn't even think about adding it there for different highlights that like we've repeatedly said that ESPN is kind of pushed way to the back burner there. So I've really enjoyed doing this. Hopefully we can add in some more kind of topics like this and other ones similar to it moving forward here. So we'll do that as much as we can. We would love to hear your feedback, whether you agree, whether you disagree, whether you like it, whether you don't like it. We're happy to hear your feedback and have a conversation about it.
Yeah, absolutely. This was fun, man. I definitely think this is something that going forward we'll continue to try to do is have these kind of topic discussions, I guess you can call them, versus about anything really, about anything that may be on our mind at that particular time. So I think this is a good way to kind of split it up, not just be a breakdown kind of show, it to actually be some sort of discussion about a popular topic in the world of sports. So I think this was a good one to start on. I think we'll get some pretty good feedback on it. I hope we get good feedback on it, and good or bad, like we always say there. So good stuff, man, and I really enjoyed it.
I certainly did too. So thanks for listening, and have a great rest of your week. Thank you so much for listening to the Lifelong Rivals Sports Podcast. We really appreciate it. We've changed some things up based on some of the feedback we've received, so we'd love to continue hearing your feedback as we continue to build this platform with our podcast. It's very helpful to us if you can share it with the people you know that you think would be interested. We'd really appreciate it. Thank you so much, and have a great week.